Yeah, that was
why isn't it there?
that was somewhat captured in the vessel tracking systems on the end. Sorry, I guess it didn't know. But, radar is a specific thing. The single rate absence.
Okay, thanks for that, Bill. Absence of radar. Anything else that people see that jumps to mind as a gap? Don't be shy. We weren't shy in the other room, so it must be the marine transportation people who are shy. Come on, speak up. Anything that you saw for... Yes, please.
It wasn't recorded because it wasn't considered significant enough, but it's significant to me, and that is just some of the wording in the draft document, page 13 and 16 specifically. It alludes to the fact that oil tankers currently serve the ports of Kitimat and Prince Rupert, when in fact the central and northern coastal communities are served by tug and barge for their fuel needs, whether that's oil and gas, and that condensate tankers have only been going to the port of Kitimat since 2006. So I think it's, because this is a government document, I think it should be accurately reflected.
Okay, thanks for that. That's the kind of feedback that we need. So I'm going to put Neil on the spot in a second. He's got some questions, like I collected a bunch of questions at the break that we didn't have a chance to do in plenary. There's a bit of a theme there, so he's been able to take a look at them. And I should say that there's 3 more on my computer screen that were emailed to me. So maybe if I talk long enough, you'll get a chance to take a look at those too. But we definitely, part of the objective here is to get people engaged in this process, not only in the planning process downstream, but also in the baseline research. So we are looking for your input at this time. So commercial fishery, and I should say, like, this is not the end. If you wake, if you wake up in the middle of the night tomorrow, and you realize that you forgot to say something, then the group is very accessible, and their coordinates will be provided. They're in some of the documentation. They're easy to get a hold of. So this is definitely not your only chance.
Okay. So I won't attribute these questions to individuals unless they want to volunteer themselves. I don't know how they've been passed to me. So the first question begins with a comment. Access to raw or even processed data is occasionally problematic, even when paid for through Treasury Board funding. How will use of private money, brackets Moore, and I assume it's a reference to the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, some of you may be familiar with that foundation. How will the use of private money impact the use of and future access to any data provided by these local experts? So I guess I should preface this by saying that the potential for the involvement of private funders or external funding sources like Moore or others is something that we're willing to entertain as an initiative, provided that happens under certain principles. And I imagine that some of those principles would likely need to reference how we make use of any information collected and where that information goes and who it belongs to. Now at this stage there are no arrangements like that in place, so there is the data that you're providing, or the information that you provide here, would be treated under the principles that we have drafted for the initiative, which we can speak to a bit later, perhaps. And as any efforts are made to engage with external funding sources, we would need to have some principles around that kind of relationship that guide the conditions under which we are willing to work with them. So the second question here is, since we are not being paid to provide data, how can we be assured that these data are used appropriately and for local benefit? So my thoughts on this is that this is really a question about developing a good process. So in order to sort of make sure that data are used appropriately and for local benefit, we need to develop a planning process that provides adequate opportunities for people to be engaged in the process and basically be providing that input and direction about how to use the data and what is an appropriate use of it. And that's what we're trying to sort of lay out with the document that I referenced in my presentation called this stakeholder engagement strategy. So we'll be looking to develop different ways for people to engage at different points in the process so that there are opportunities for that direction over how do we use information that you provide. So next question is, will PENSEMA continue to travel out to the larger coastal communities to involve the unfunded stakeholders, or will PENSEMA be holding most of its meetings in the lower mainland locations? I mean, the short answer is yes, we will continue to travel out to coastal communities. I think that's a completely fundamental part of how we undertake this, and that's part of the reason we're here today. It's part of the reason that upon release of this engagement strategy, we're planning 8 community consultations. Those will be taking place in Campbell River, in Port Hardy, in Bella Coola, in Prince Rupert, in Kitimat, in Skidegate, in Masset. We will also make an opportunity for those people who are based out of the lower mainland to convene and discuss that strategy as well. And moving past that particular sort of document, this will continue to be a sort of an aspect of how we engage with folks, is to come out to communities and create these kinds of opportunities for dialogue. Next question is, how will cultural values be measured and reported? I think that's a great question to bring to the sessions tomorrow. I think that the consulting team will have a better response for you than I could provide off the cuff here, but I would encourage that be a topic for discussion when we have breakout sessions dedicated to that. And just to come back to, I think all of us recognize that it's not as if we can separate a cultural discussion over here and talk about marine transportation or commercial fishing or what have you today without reference to things like culture and the importance of those activities to communities. So I would encourage you to, first of all, let's all acknowledge that, and we're not expecting that you somehow mentally dissect one from the other, and that we can find room to talk about an activity in the context of its cultural importance. I think that's already come to the surface this morning. But we recognize on top of that we may want to have a dedicated discussion to sort of the cultural aspects that are going to have relevance to a planning exercise. Next question, will the report be text and GIS? I think it's primarily text. There may be some use of GIS to illustrate. So there will be some use of GIS and maps, but I think maybe it's important to point out for the person who asked this question and others, there are other products that have been developed in draft and are being developed in the future that will really bring that sort of spatial element to this information as well. So there will be multiple products that try to cover off some of this stuff. So some of you may be familiar with something called the Marine Use Analysis, which was issued a number of years ago out of DFO, that sort of tries to map out where do things happen. There's an atlas that's being drafted to sort of, again, identify where activities take place, what some of the important ecological features within the area might be. So there will be other products that provide you some of that mapped kind of information. So next question here is, where does the information go when the decisions are to be made? I don't know if the person who asked this wants to provide a bit more detail. I'm not quite sure what they want to know. Okay, no, I will do my best to answer it as it is then.
Since I was the one who took the note of that, I guess the question is, how does this information report